Hegel's Science of Logic is an incredibly dense, abstract text attempting to introduce a new form of logic for the scientific universe. But why bother studying this text? Why bother putting in all the time and effort required to really understand the density and the depths of this text when surely there are other modern logicians to study? Surely there are easier texts. Surely there are texts that are more accessible. Why put in the effort? Before I start this video, I want to let you know that the Science of Logic course starts January 16th, 2023. And if you buy now, there's a Christmas sale. In between now and December 25th, 2023, find discounts on all 4 tiers available: the recorded, the live, the expert, and the one-on-one tiers. To find out more, visit philosophyportal.online/the science of logic. Let's start with a view of modern science. In modern science, there is a split between what we could call reductionist science and holistic emergentist science. Usually, reductionist science will view holistic emergentism as epiphenomenal and of no real meaning or value in relationship to the generation of knowledge. Whereas the holistic emergentist science will see reductionist science as only focusing on parts, only focusing on isolated, artificial aspects of being, which have no relation to the whole, which have no relationship to our entire spiritual life as a totality. Hegel was well aware of this split, and the entire science of logic is in many ways determined in such a way as that this split becomes reconciled. This is done with the triad being, essence, and concept, where when one studies the mechanics or the parts of being, one also has to be aware that one is a subject within a socio-historical community. One way of thinking about this is that you can no longer think of just the abstract being of a fundamental physics without physics as also being thought as a necessary spiritual community. How does that work? What is the relationship between fundamental physics and physics as a spiritual community? These are the types of questions which Hegel will allow us to investigate using his philosophical method, whereas in our contemporary discussions and our contemporary reflections, these discussions are usually not even on the table. Another way of thinking about the way Hegel introduces the triad being an essence of concept is thinking about spiritual communities themselves as fundamental. But not only that spiritual communities as fundamental are themselves engaged in reductions of being and establish themselves and maintain themselves through time through such reductions. In this way, both reductionist science and holistic emergentism are in many ways reconciled for a new understanding of the concept. Next, let's go to the idea of life movement. How to live given the unity of being and nothing. Let's approach this very simply. Hegel claims that being comes up in nothing, and nothing comes up in being. They're fundamentally a unity. How can you think about this? Well, think about the history of your love. Think about the history of your social relationships. Think about very basic processes which are nonetheless extremely important, like eating, sleeping, or even your sexual desire, your desire for social recognition, career building, and professional ambition. In all of these dimensions of our most essential life, being comes up in nothing, and nothing comes up in being. As a consequence, we can often become ethically disoriented in these spaces. How to hold, how to let go. The very dialectics of life movement are found at the core of Hegel's Science of Logic. The life movement which oscillates between the absence of the one and the appearance of the many. Many philosophical problems and abstract thought experiments struggle with this oscillation, namely the absence of the one and the appearance of the many. Problems of unity and division, problems of presence and absence, all of these things which structure our social life, our love relationships, our basic eating processes, sleeping processes, our sexual desire, our attempt to build a career, our attempt to become recognized by certain important individuals. All of this is investigated in Hegel's Science of Logic. Next, a strange two-in-one. Two-in-one here refers to a split of conscious experience, a split of conscious experience which is often never reconciled, and even though it's experienced by many people, becomes something of an eternal problem. That is the eternal problem between what we might call ordinary consciousness and mystical consciousness. One way to think about ordinary consciousness is just the consciousness of day-to-day life, the consciousness of interacting with your family, your friends, your attempt to build a career, and so forth. One way to think about mystical consciousness is your direct experience of the absolute, the need for something more than this every day-to-day life, the need for some contact with something divine, something sacred. Now, the problem on this split between ordinary consciousness and mystical consciousness is that oftentimes, if you walk the mystical path, you can miss the ordinary path. And if you walk the ordinary path, you can miss the mystical path. In short, direct experience of the absolute versus the need to integrate that experience within a social order with a common logic. Many can become split between the mystical path and the normative path, perceiving them as separate, unrelated, and without possibility of a higher relation. Think about, for example, all of the people throughout history who abandon normal life for a mystical withdrawal from the world. Or think about all those people who live an ordinary life who never have any contact with anything mystical, divine, or sacred. Many people who experiment with walking the limit edges of consciousness versus walking the social line, so to speak, of normative existence. For Hegel, this too is one. And in the logic, there's an exploration of the way in which these two become mediated as a process of becoming, which includes both. Next, think about spiritual determination, namely art, religion, science, as not abstract representations, but as the subject's object. Oftentimes in our contemporary educations, in our university systems, we are taught the abstract content of art, religion, and science, the history of art, religion, and science, and perhaps some of the greatest figures who contributed to these fields. However, we're very often not taught about how art, religion, and science are actually absolute determinations of the spirit. In other words, we shift from thinking about the representations of art, religion, and science, and we start thinking about the motivations involved in determining art, religion, and science as a core life path for our very becoming. In other words, we shift from thinking about the way ordinary consciousness represents these phenomena and start thinking about the core of desire, the core of my contributions to art, religion, and science, and how I participate in that notional becoming. From abstract knowledge, in short, to the source of knowledge itself. These themes appear deeply in Hegel's Science of Logic. Finally, a new form of objectivity. When we think about objectivity, so crucial for the scientific worldview, we're not really including the subject's object, namely the coming to be of what I just mentioned, art, religion, and science. Here, Hegel's not so much interested in introducing a worldview, but rather an understanding of subjective worlding as such. In other words, the process of the subject coming to inhabit the concept, or what Hegel will refer to as the absolute idea. For Hegel on this path, there is no way to escape discursivity or language for a final perfect image, namely an identification, let's say, with a certain worldview. Another way you can think about this as related to pleasure is that there's no treat at the end of the tunnel here in Hegelian thought. Rather, we have to work through and with language, its rational limits, its paradoxes, and its contradictions. It's in working through and with language that we come to inhabit the concept, where we come to build a subjective world, where we come to define a new type of conceptual objectivity. In this way, when we interact with other subjectivity, we should pay attention not to the external cognition of the other subject, but rather the subject's internal object, their own conceptual determinations, and the way in which those conceptual determinations are mediating the becoming of their identity in relation to the absolute idea. So why study the science of logic? Why bother entering and engaging this extremely dense abstract text where surely there must be other resources, surely there must be an easier way to approach these dimensions? Whether or not that's the case, Hegel's science of logic represents a foundation stone to think modern science, the oscillation between reductionism and emergentism. Hegel's science of logic opens up our eyes to the nature of life movement, the unity of being and nothing, and how to deal with that unity in a process which moves towards a new form of becoming. A two-in-one, namely the capacity to work with both mystical and the ordinary states of mind, to see them not as radically split and destined for a lack of reconciliation, but rather to see them as one process which allows one to both have contact with the divine and walk around in ordinary day-to-day life. Spiritual determination, not the abstract representations of art, science, and religion, but our own motivations and our own core of desire in relation to our own becoming of art, science, and religion, our own participation in the processes of art, science, and religion. And finally, a new form of objectivity, an objectivity which is in touch with subjective worlding, processes of the coming to be of new objective concepts. It's this dimension and these 5 aspects which, to my mind, are the most essential when thinking and studying with the science of logic. Again, the Science of Logic course starts January 16, 2023. And if you act now, there's a Christmas sale until December 25th, 2023, where all 4 tiers of the course, recorded, live, expert, and one-on-one, are on a discount. So if you're interested in studying the foundations of logic, visit philosophyportal.online/the science of logic.